Everyone loves the excitement of preparing for a baby shower. The decorations, the gifts, the anticipation of welcoming a new life. It's one of the most joyous moments for any family. Friends and loved ones gathered, waiting for the expectant mother to arrive. But instead of balloons and laughter, they were met with horror. Her apartment had been stripped bare, her dresser, her clothes, her furniture, all gone, like someone was erasing her from existence. This wasn't decades ago, it happened in 2017 in Baltimore. A young woman, 22 years old, 8 months pregnant, vanished without a trace. And the dark truth of what happened next is more grotesque and disturbing than anyone could imagine. This is the case of Akia Eggleston. Akia was the kind of person who brought joy wherever she went. Those who knew her described her as someone with a warm heart, always ready to help anyone in need. She had a passion for dancing and loved expressing herself through various forms of art. Her world centered around her close family, especially her stepfather, aunt, and grandmother, who would become her main sources of support. During that particular May, Akia found herself depending on her family more than usual. She was 8 months into what doctors had labeled as a high-risk pregnancy, all while raising her 2-year-old daughter, Emery, on her own. The burden of these responsibilities felt even heavier because Akia was still dealing with the grief of losing her mother, who had died from breast cancer just 2 years before. The loss of her mother had created a deep emptiness in Akia's life. After her mother's death, Akia seemed to change. She became more quiet and kept more to herself than she used to. The one thing that still brought her comfort was volunteering and staying connected with her community. However, even these activities became harder to manage as her second pregnancy progressed. Since Akia's pregnancy was considered high risk, her doctor had given her strict instructions to get plenty of rest. This meant she couldn't drive, take long walks, or do anything too physically demanding. Despite these restrictions, Akia seemed to have found a solution to her situation. At the time, she was in a relationship with Michael Robertson, a 35-year-old man who was the father of her unborn baby. They were making plans to move into a new home together before the baby arrived. They had already chosen a name for their son, Anubis. Akia and Michael's connection went back many years. In fact, Michael's grandmother had been Akia's babysitter when she was a child, so their families had known each other for a long time. The two had reconnected in the middle of 2016 when they ran into each other at a mutual friend's birthday party. Soon after that meeting, they started dating. After Akia became pregnant, they began planning their future together. This was something that made Akia genuinely happy and excited. On May 3, 2017, Akia went to the bank and withdrew money to pay for a deposit on their new apartment. For days later, on May 7th, she had organized a beautiful baby shower for herself. Akia had planned every detail of the baby shower herself. She had spent nearly $1,000 on the location and decorations. But as time passed and the appetizers were served, something very important was missing from the baby shower: Akia herself, the expectant mother. Everyone knew that Akia was 8 months pregnant, and those closest to her knew that her pregnancy was considered high risk. Naturally, everyone's first thought was that maybe she was at the hospital dealing with some complication, or perhaps she had already gone into labor. The problem was that Akia wasn't answering her phone as everyone was arriving at her party. So the family decided to call Stefan, one of Akia's closest friends in the world. He was supposed to pick Akia up that day and drive her to her own baby shower, since she wasn't allowed to drive herself due to her medical restrictions. Since Akia's family knew about this arrangement, they contacted Stefan to ask if he and Akia were together. Stefan told them no. Akia had said she would call him when she was ready to be picked up, but he hadn't heard from her that day. He had simply assumed she was running late. That's when Stefan and several other party guests decided to rush over to Akia's apartment to check on her. When they arrived at her place, there was no sign of Akia anywhere. Even more strange, many of her belongings were missing. It wasn't just small items like money and jewelry. Heavy pieces of furniture had been removed from the apartment. Her dresser was gone, and most of her clothes had been taken from her closet. This was clearly something that Akia couldn't have done by herself, especially being 8 months pregnant. At this point, the family called 911 and then went to the police station to file a missing person report. That same day, police visited Akia's apartment, but they didn't find any significant evidence. To them, it simply looked like someone was in the process of moving out of the apartment. Meanwhile, the family searched the park near Akia's home, hoping to find her or some sign of what had happened to her, but they found nothing. Once it was confirmed that Akia wasn't at any of the local hospitals, the police began working to piece together a timeline of what might have happened, because now they had an 8 months pregnant mother who was missing. The police discovered that Akia, who was very active on social media, hadn't posted anything online since May 3rd. This meant that 4 whole days had passed between Akia's last online activity and when she failed to appear at her baby shower. Her family found this silence particularly odd because Akia had been regularly sharing updates about her pregnancy with her followers on social media. Her final post on the afternoon of May 3rd showed a picture of her latest sonogram. When the investigation officially began and officers started interviewing everyone who knew her, they discovered they were already 4 days behind. 4 days might not seem like a long time under normal circumstances, but when someone goes missing, especially a pregnant woman, every hour that passes makes the situation more serious and the chances of a positive outcome much lower. Security footage from May 3rd showed Akia at a local bank, where she had gone to withdraw money for the deposit on her new apartment. The cameras captured the 4'1" woman wearing a green t-shirt and black sweatpants. A friend had provided transportation for her that day, driving her to the bank and then dropping her back off at her apartment sometime between 2 and 3 in the afternoon. This timing matched up with cell phone tower data, which showed that one of the last signals from Akia's phone came from a tower located near that same bank. But after that point, it was as if Akia had simply vanished without leaving any trace behind. Following May 3rd, there were no more posts on social media, no more Facebook messages sent to friends, no more trips to the bank, and no more cell phone activity of any kind. What made the situation even more frightening was that the investigation continued for weeks and months, with police and family members searching everywhere they could think of. But Akia's due date came and went without any sign of her. The authorities had no leads, no evidence pointing to where she might have gone, and no clues about what could have happened to both her and her unborn son. The situation was made even more tragic by the fact that there was a 2-year-old little girl, Emery, who was left wondering what had happened to her mother. Despite the urgency of the situation, it took some time before police brought in the one person they probably should have questioned right away, Akia's boyfriend, and the father of her unborn child, 35-year-old Michael Robertson. To be fair to the investigators, Michael wasn't making himself easy to find or interview. According to official police statements, Michael had developed a pattern of avoiding contact with law enforcement, sometimes disappearing for weeks or even months between interviews. Since the police didn't have grounds to arrest him, they needed his cooperation to conduct proper interrogations, which made the investigation much more challenging. When detectives finally managed to get Michael to sit down for a formal interview on June 15th, a full month after Akia's disappearance, he told them something slightly different from what he had originally told her family. He claimed that the last time he had seen Akia was on May 1st, which was 2 days before she was last seen by anyone else. Michael's story to the police was that he had stopped by Akia's apartment that day, left to go to work, and when he returned later, he found all of his belongings packed up in a box. According to Michael, he didn't interpret this as a sign that they were preparing to move in together as they had planned. Instead, he saw it as Akia's way of telling him that she was ending their relationship and wanted him out of her life. Beyond this basic account, Michael didn't provide investigators with much useful information to help with their search for Akia. However, by July 2017, the police had become fairly confident that something criminal had happened to Akia. They strongly suspected that Michael Robertson might have been involved, especially after they discovered several suspicious facts about his behavior and background. One particularly troubling detail was that Michael had gotten a completely new phone and phone number just 1 day before Akia's baby shower was scheduled to take place. Even more shocking was the discovery that Michael had been living an entirely double life, maintaining a secret relationship with another family while he was supposedly planning a future with Akia. It turned out that 35-year-old Michael was simultaneously involved with another 22-year-old woman named Haley, and they had children together as well. The timeline of these relationships was particularly disturbing. Haley had given birth to her second child with Michael in August of 2016, and then just 1 month later, Akia became pregnant with Michael's child. This meant that Michael had gotten another woman pregnant almost immediately after Haley had just given birth to their second baby together. The logistics of maintaining these two separate relationships and families seemed almost impossible to manage, yet somehow Michael had been juggling both situations simultaneously. While it's unclear whether Haley initially knew about Akia's existence, it appears that Akia was at least somewhat aware of Haley and Michael's other children. However, the exact details of what Michael had told each woman about the other remains uncertain. He might have simply told Akia that Haley was an ex-girlfriend with whom he shared custody of children, without revealing that they were still actively involved. What is known is that around April 2017, just a few months before Akia disappeared, Michael and Haley had been evicted from the apartment they shared together. This eviction was what led to Michael staying at Akia's place on a more regular basis. When questioned by detectives, Michael claimed that he wasn't even certain whether Akia's unborn baby was actually his child. He said he had been under the impression that their relationship was open and non-exclusive, so he felt a paternity test would be necessary once the baby was born. He told investigators that if the test proved he was the father, then he would be willing to step up and take responsibility for the child. However, Michael also acknowledged that Akia herself was completely convinced that he was the father of her baby. According to his account, problems in their relationship began when Akia started asking him to accompany her to doctor's appointments and ultrasound visits. When he refused these requests, saying he wanted to wait for paternity test results first, arguments between them started to increase in frequency and intensity. Michael claimed that when he returned to Akia's apartment and saw all his belongings packed up, he waited around for her to come home so they could discuss what was happening between them. According to his version of events, Akia never returned home that evening. Based on this experience, he concluded that their relationship was truly over, which explained why he didn't attend the baby shower and why he hadn't tried to contact her afterward. Michael insisted to the police that he was genuinely concerned about Akia's well-being and completely denied having any involvement in her disappearance. However, when investigators pressed him about who else might be responsible, he pointed them toward someone he claimed to be suspicious of: Akia's best friend, Stefan. Stefan was the same person who had been assigned to pick Akia up and drive her to the baby shower. But Michael painted a very different picture of Stefan's relationship with Akia. According to Michael, Stefan's feelings for Akia went far beyond normal friendship boundaries. He described Stefan as being completely obsessed with her. Michael told investigators that Stefan would drop everything whenever Akia needed something. If she needed transportation somewhere, Stefan would immediately make himself available. If she was short on rent money, Stefan would offer to lend her cash without asking any questions. This level of devotion, according to Michael, suggested that Stefan's feelings were much deeper and more intense than typical friendship would warrant. When investigators began looking into Stefan, they discovered that the two friends were indeed extremely close. Akia trusted Stefan enough to give him the passwords to her Gmail and Facebook accounts, and she had even given him a key to her apartment. This level of access and trust was unusual even for close friends. The investigation into Stefan revealed another concerning detail: he owned a gun. This discovery prompted police to bring him in for formal questioning. During the interview, Stefan told investigators something that immediately raised red flags and made him appear even more suspicious. Stefan explained that a day or two before the baby shower was scheduled to take place, he had made arrangements to meet with Akia because he was planning to loan her $200. When she didn't contact him about this planned meeting, he became worried about her well-being and decided to use his key to check on her at her apartment. According to Stefan, when he entered Akia's apartment, he noticed that many of her belongings were missing. Her clothes were gone. The new crib she had bought for the baby was no longer there, and he even observed several holes in the walls of the apartment. The timing of Stefan's discovery was particularly troubling. This meant that days before the baby shower, when the rest of Akia's family discovered the disturbing state of her apartment and realized she was missing, Stefan had already seen clear evidence that something was wrong. Despite discovering that Akia wasn't answering his calls and that her apartment showed signs of a hasty departure, Stefan never reported her missing to the police. Even more suspicious was Stefan's behavior on the day of the baby shower itself. When Akia's family called him asking whether he had picked her up for the party, Stefan simply said he was still waiting to hear from her. He never mentioned that he had already been to her apartment, seen that her belongings were gone, and been unable to reach her for days. When investigators asked Stefan directly whether he and Akia had ever been romantically involved, his answer was evasive. He said they had sort of dated, but claimed it hadn't lasted very long. However, when police examined the Facebook messages between Stefan and Akia, they discovered intimate conversations that strongly suggested the two had been sleeping together, possibly on and off for an extended period. The digital evidence painted a clear picture of the dynamics between them. Stefan appeared to have deep romantic feelings for Akia, while she seemed to view their relationship as more casual, essentially a friends with benefits arrangement. This imbalance in their feelings provided what investigators considered a possible motive for a crime of passion. The revelation about Stefan's unrequited feelings also made Michael's insistence on a paternity test seem more reasonable. If Akia was involved with multiple men around the time she became pregnant, Michael's uncertainty about the baby's parentage became more understandable. Investigators confronted Stefan with the obvious question: why hadn't he called police immediately when he couldn't reach Akia and discovered her apartment in such a strange condition? Stefan's explanation was that he hadn't found the situation alarming enough to involve law enforcement right away. He said he had decided to wait until the baby shower to see if he heard from her, knowing that she would never miss such an important event. Despite the suspicious circumstances, Stefan had been very cooperative with the investigation from the beginning. He had even been posting messages on social media about trying to find Akia, writing emotionally charged statements like, "If I have to move mountains or take a life, I will find you." With Stefan apparently cleared, investigators turned their attention to a new person of interest, someone who had very good reason to dislike Akia if she knew about her existence. This was Michael's other girlfriend, Haley Pomeroy. Haley and Michael already had 2 children together, and while Akia seemed to know about Haley's existence, it was unclear how much Haley initially knew about Akia. When investigators looked into this angle, they discovered that Haley's reaction to learning about Michael's relationship with Akia had been explosive. Haley was described by people who knew her as having a volatile personality, and she had clearly been furious about Michael's affair. She had been posting angry messages on Facebook, calling Akia a home wrecker and expressing her rage about the situation. When police brought Haley in for questioning, she didn't try to hide her feelings about Akia. She openly admitted that her feelings were hurt and that she hated Akia for interfering in her relationship with Michael. However, she insisted that despite her anger, she would never actually hurt anyone. Throughout the entire interview, Haley maintained her innocence and denied any involvement in Akia's disappearance. Police obtained a subpoena for her phone records to verify her claims, and the digital evidence seemed to support her version of events. There was nothing in her phone data that connected her to Akia's disappearance. With both Stefan and Haley apparently cleared as suspects, the investigation found itself back where it had started, with no clear leads and no obvious perpetrator. As 2017 continued, months passed without any new developments in Akia's case. Frustrated by the lack of progress, her family decided to take matters into their own hands. They began reaching out to various media outlets, hoping to make Akia's story more public and perhaps pressure local law enforcement to prioritize her case more actively. Despite their efforts to contact multiple news organizations, the family found that no one seemed interested in covering Akia's story. One outlet even told them directly that her case wasn't considered newsworthy enough to warrant their attention. Faced with this rejection from mainstream media, the family reached out to the Black and Missing Foundation, a nonprofit organization specifically dedicated to bringing more awareness to missing persons of color. With the foundation's help, the family was finally able to start spreading the word about Akia's disappearance. For months after she had vanished, Akia's story finally began gaining traction. By September of 2017, news of her disappearance was being reported throughout Baltimore, and eventually the story gained national attention. People were finally talking about Akia and demanding answers for her family. The increased media coverage had the desired effect. In November of that year, the FBI finally joined the investigation. The Baltimore field office even offered a reward of $25,000 to anyone who could provide valuable information about Akia's whereabouts. Despite the increased attention and resources, the case remained baffling. It seemed almost impossible that someone could simply disappear so completely, especially in an urban area where there are typically many potential witnesses and security cameras. Around this same time, an intriguing clue emerged that would add another layer of mystery to the case. That fall, a group of Akia's family members and friends had gathered in front of her apartment building to hold a vigil and prayer circle for her and her unborn baby. As they were cleaning up after the emotional gathering and preparing to leave, one of Akia's friends noticed something unusual in the shrubs near the front door of her apartment building. Hidden in the bushes was Akia's debit card. What made this discovery particularly strange was the condition of the card. Despite the fact that it should have been sitting outside in the weather for months if it had been there since Akia disappeared, the debit card appeared to be in remarkably good condition, almost as if it were brand new. While the debit card discovery didn't provide any major breakthrough in solving the case, it served as another strange piece of evidence that strengthened investigators' belief that someone had deliberately harmed Akia. The circumstances strongly suggested that whoever was responsible was likely someone from her inner circle, someone she knew and trusted. With this in mind, police decided to focus their attention on what they considered their strongest evidence: Akia's cell phone data. The digital trail from her phone would prove to be crucial in building their case. After careful analysis of the cell phone records, investigators became confident that whatever happened to Akia occurred around 5:22 in the evening on May 3rd. They were able to pinpoint the specific time because Akia had been actively engaged in a social media conversation, and then suddenly all activity stopped completely. At this exact time, Stefan's alibi cleared him completely as a suspect. The investigation also revealed that Haley had been with her mother that evening, receiving help with caring for her 2 children. This left investigators with only one person whose whereabouts couldn't be confirmed at that critical moment: Michael Robertson, the father of Akia's unborn child and their original primary suspect. As detectives focused more intensively on Michael's activities during this time frame, his story began falling apart in numerous ways. Several aspects of his behavior immediately following Akia's disappearance had already raised suspicions among investigators. Most notably, Michael had changed his cell phone number just 3 days after Akia vanished. He had also refused to participate in any of the search efforts for her, despite the fact that she was carrying his child. While Michael claimed that Akia had broken up with him several days before the baby shower and that he hadn't seen her since then, the people who knew Akia best said this version of events didn't match what they had observed. In fact, just days before the baby shower, Akia had been telling friends how excited she was about moving in with Michael. Furthermore, on May 3rd itself, she had clearly been withdrawing money from the bank specifically to pay the deposit on their shared apartment. When investigators finally obtained Michael's phone records, they discovered that his account of events was completely false. The digital evidence showed that on May 2nd, Michael had sent photographs of apartment interiors to someone, clearly indicating that he and Akia were still actively looking for a place to live together right up until the day she disappeared. Even more damning was what the phone records revealed about May 3rd itself. The last outgoing call from Akia's phone occurred at 3:44 in the afternoon, and it was placed to Michael Robertson. 20 minutes later, at 4 p.m., Michael had taken a ride-sharing service from his location to Akia's apartment. Most significantly, this ride had been ordered using Akia's phone. Michael's cell phone data showed that he remained in the area near Akia's apartment from at least 5:35 p.m. until 6:18 p.m. that day. Later, around 6:57 p.m., something very telling occurred. A telemarketer attempted to call Akia's phone, and at that moment, both Akia's and Michael's phones were located in downtown Baltimore, miles away from her apartment. Immediately after that telemarketer's call came through, Akia's phone was either turned off or disabled completely. This suggested that whoever had possession of her phone realized it was still active when the call came in and quickly shut it off to avoid detection. The phone was never turned back on after that moment. If the cell phone evidence wasn't suspicious enough, investigators discovered something even more incriminating about Michael's activities that evening. After returning home, Michael had conducted multiple internet searches on his home computer that painted a horrifying picture of his intentions. Michael had searched for information about how to dispose of and hide a body. He had also conducted 18 separate searches related to trash collection services, wanting to know where dumpster contents were taken and the locations of various landfills around Baltimore. These internet searches provided investigators with what they believed was clear evidence of Michael's guilt, but they also presented a significant challenge. Despite having substantial digital evidence pointing to Michael's involvement, they lacked the physical evidence that would make their case ironclad. They had no DNA evidence, no confession, and most importantly, no body. However, investigators did develop a theory about what they believed had happened on the afternoon of May 3rd. They theorized that Michael had taken that ride-sharing service to Akia's apartment, possibly with the intention of ending their relationship or telling her that he was choosing to stay with Haley instead. Whatever Michael's original purpose for the visit, investigators believed that it triggered a heated argument between the couple. According to their theory, this confrontation escalated to physical violence, and Michael ended up killing Akia, whether intentionally or accidentally. The investigators theorized that after killing Akia, Michael wrapped her body in a blanket that was later found to be missing from her bed. They believed he then placed her body inside the dresser from her bedroom, the same dresser that Stefan and family members had noticed was gone from her apartment. This theory would explain the holes in the apartment walls that multiple people had observed. Michael would have needed to maneuver the heavy dresser, with Akia's body inside, through the apartment and out of the building. The investigators believed he then placed the dresser, containing Akia's remains, in a nearby dumpster located just 30 feet from her apartment building. Despite having developed this detailed theory and possessing significant circumstantial evidence, the most frustrating aspect of the case was how long it took for law enforcement to act on their suspicions. Years passed without any charges being filed against Michael. It wasn't until February 2022 that investigators finally brought Michael Robertson in for another round of questioning, hoping they might be able to extract a confession from him. During this 2022 interrogation, investigators confronted Michael with evidence they had gathered over the years. They told him they knew he had seen Akia 2 days after he claimed his last contact with her, and they had spoken with the ride-sharing driver who confirmed he had transported Michael to Akia's apartment on the night she disappeared. Faced with this undeniable evidence that he had lied about his whereabouts, Michael finally admitted the truth. He acknowledged that he had indeed seen Akia on the night she vanished and that they had gotten into a serious argument. According to Michael's new version of events, Akia had just gotten out of the shower when she caught him texting Haley. This discovery led to Akia giving Michael an ultimatum. He had to choose between her and Haley. When Michael told her he was choosing Haley, Akia declared that their relationship was over. Michael claimed that this decision caused their argument to become even more intense and heated. However, he continued to insist that nothing physical had occurred between them, repeatedly denying that he had harmed her in any way. While investigators had hoped this interrogation might lead to a full confession to murder, Michael's partial admission still provided them with something valuable. Based on this admission, combined with all the other evidence they had gathered, authorities finally decided they had enough to proceed with charges. The now 41-year-old Michael Robertson was placed under arrest and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, one for Akia and one for her unborn son, Anubis. Over the years since Akia's disappearance, there had been multiple searches for her body and that of her unborn child. These searches included extensive efforts at a landfill in Northern Virginia, where investigators believed the contents of the dumpster they suspected Michael had used would have been taken. Despite these extensive efforts, neither Akia nor her baby were ever found. The absence of physical remains presented prosecutors with a significant challenge as they prepared for trial. They had no fingerprints, no DNA evidence, and no eyewitnesses to the actual crime. Their case would have to rely entirely on digital evidence from phone records, Michael's suspicious internet searches, and his own admission that he had fought with Akia during what appeared to be their final encounter. However, as the trial proceeded, one piece of evidence emerged as particularly compelling to the jury members. The most convincing element of the prosecution's case turned out to be the cell phone data showing that both Akia's and Michael's phones had left her apartment together and traveled to downtown Baltimore that evening, where Akia's phone was then permanently shut off. This evidence was significant because it made it virtually impossible for Michael to claim that he had simply left Akia alive at her apartment and that someone else had harmed her afterward. If that had been the case, her phone would have remained at the apartment location, not traveled downtown with his phone. During the trial, this was the one piece of evidence for which Michael's defense team couldn't provide a reasonable alternative explanation. Michael himself didn't attempt to offer any justification for why both phones would have moved together and why Akia's phone would have been turned off in downtown Baltimore if he had left her alive and well at her apartment. After 3.5 weeks of testimony from various witnesses and experts, and following 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned to the courtroom with their verdict. They found Michael Robertson guilty on both counts of first-degree murder, one count for killing Akia and another for killing her unborn son, Anubis. The judge sentenced Michael to 2 consecutive life sentences for his crimes, ensuring that he would spend the rest of his life in prison for what he had done to Akia and her baby. Unfortunately, while the guilty verdict provided some measure of justice, it didn't bring the kind of peace or closure that Akia's family had hoped for. The most painful aspect of the entire ordeal remained unchanged. Akia and Anubis's bodies were still missing, somewhere out there without a proper burial. The family had never been able to say their final goodbyes or lay their loved ones to rest with dignity. Putting Michael Robertson behind bars, while important, couldn't undo the fact that Akia and her son had been denied the respectful treatment they deserved in death. Their remains were still lost, leaving a permanent wound in the hearts of those who loved them.